Hi, I'm Cecil Walker,
And I'm Adam Frower.
and this is Possibilities. Today we are going to be chatting about how to manage stress.
I feel a big ominous question. I'm starting to get stressed myself.
You should. You got that fancy PhD, so you should know how to answer some of these things. It's a big question, I think, but I don't know where to start other than, maybe defining what we're kind of capturing, I guess, by stress. What are people dealing with when we're talking about stress? And then I can launch at you. So what do we do about it?
If I beat you. I think if I were to define stress, I kind of think about it as like stress as in the term that comes from like physics or something like that. There's tension there, or there's pressure. And so I think when we use those terms of like tension or pressure or those kinds of things, it I think broadens it to lots of things. I think we could have too many things on the to-do list that just kind of build up and build up. Even that terminology of build up, right? It just means like ultimately more and more pressure. So it's a figurative example of like more pressure being exerted on something. I think if you have a tough decision to make, and you're trying to decide one way or the other, you can kind of feel that tension of I could go this way or I could go that way. If you're in relationships and two people aren't getting along, and again you kind of feel that tension of like who should I agree with, which side should I be on. So I think it can be from those kinds of things. I think it can be lots of times, again, people in school, they have a big exam coming up and the pressure of performing well, that this one particular moment has some significant ramifications of what life might be like after this significant moment. So I think, again, there's that figurative pressure of this is a really significant thing that will impact what happens next. So I think when we think about it in those terms, it kind of helps us to understand it could be lots of different things.
Mm-hmm. So I think, as you're putting it, stress is kind of boiled down to there's something important riding on this moment, this interaction, or something like that. When I think about the experience of stress, it feels like it can show up in a lot of different dimensions, like in a very physical, real kind of a way, like the stress on your body. There's like this very tangible, real stress, but it of course can be stress on your mind, like just a load on your mind. You're worried, you're distracted, you're maybe even worn out, feeling like you're tired. And then maybe even kind of this dimension of an emotional stress where you're kind of like emotionally torn or emotionally feeling like that kind of pressure that you were talking about. And I think that fits really well with what you were saying, that something significant, something meaningful, there is an outcome at stake, or there is something important at stake. And I think that's how those things can kind of play themselves out when you're experiencing that stress showing up. But of course, the subsequent question is, what do we do about it? You should have known it was coming.
What should we do about it? I think, I guess a few things I would say. One is just pause. I think just pausing for a minute and kind of looking at the situation and saying, is the amount of pressure, is the amount of tension that I feel warranted given the situation? Sometimes I think we can kind of work ourselves up into thinking this is a really significant thing, but if we took a step back, maybe we realize it's not that big of a deal. I think of sometimes kids, like adolescents, they have so much pressure on a particular exam. But if you take a step back and say, how much influence does that exam have on your overall grade in the class? How much does that class have an impact on your overall GPA for your high school career? How how likely is it that this one exam is going to impact your ability to graduate or to move on to the next step of whatever you want? When we kind of take that step back, all of a sudden, what feels like a really significant thing kind of reduces to, it's an important thing, but the long-term ramifications may not be as big as we feel like they are in this moment. So I think pausing and just kind of like zooming out is one thing that can be helpful. I think another thing that can be helpful, and this comes from our solution-focused work, really, is to kind of lay on the component of identity, or like the version of myself that I want to be. And again, if I use that test example for a second, I say, like, does my performance on this test influence my identity? Does it change the way that I can view myself? I think this helps put into perspective of, like, if I want to be somebody who does my very best, doing my very best might mean I put in a lot of effort to study or to learn or to master the concepts. It doesn't necessarily translate to I get a particular score on the exam. And so I think when we pause and we kind of take into consideration, what version of myself do I want to be in this situation? It changes the focus of where my attention needs to be. It's not on the score per se, but it's on the studying, it's on the working really hard, it's on the learning something that I didn't know before. Similarly, like if we put it into like a relationship context, and I ask myself, like, what version of myself do I want to be within this relationship? That changes then. Maybe I don't need to necessarily prove that I'm right in this particular argument, but maybe I need to be the kind of person who expresses compassion or understanding, and so the way that I engage in the interaction becomes different because the version of myself that I want to show up as is different. When I align myself to who I want to be, I think by nature some of that stress and some of that tension kind of melts away, because I think oftentimes we feel that pressure or that tension when we're trying to fight against what we naturally want to be or what we find really important. And so that tension is like, I really should have said no to that thing if I was in line with myself, but I didn't say no to that thing because I was trying to please somebody else, or I was trying to accommodate to somebody else's need. So I think when we take that step back and say, who do I want to be in this particular instance, it helps naturally to kind of alleviate some of that.
Yeah, I think that's along the same lines that I was thinking as well. I really like that approach of finding the right version of you that you want to kind of show up in this moment, because I think what that does is it necessitates a shifting of the focus as you're engaging with whatever the situation is. With this example, with the test, I feel like with a lot of situations, but you could really see it play out with the test as an adolescent. You can get so caught up in the stressing over the test, over the I don't feel ready, or this test is really intimidating, the subject is really hard. I don't know if I studied long enough or hard enough, or if I was diligent enough. I'm afraid of the outcomes that might happen if I do poorly on this. And then it feels like the battle at hand is the battle with stress. And, it makes me feel sick. I don't feel like eating. I don't feel like going to school. I can feel myself shaking. I can feel myself overthinking and my mind just running away. And so all of your energy, all of your existing in that moment is, like you described earlier, it's full of tension. I'm fighting with the stress of this moment. But when you really kind of pause and look at it, that fight, even if you could somehow win that fight, isn't actually going to get you the outcome that you want. The fight with stress has nothing to do with, I want to do well on this test. What actually might help you do well is if you slept really well, if you were able to kind of stay focused as you were getting ready and as the test came and you were taking the test. If you felt really confident in yourself and believed in yourself and could do that, it could show up to the test in a way that, it just kind of seemed like you get a bit of a boost from, I feel like I've got this. I feel like I know what I'm doing. I feel like I'm sufficient enough for this task. And so I think if you to keep with that terminology of choosing the fight that actually is going to get you the outcome that you want. I think if you move the focus from fighting with stress to how do I fight to be the right kind of person for this, the right kind of me for this? How do I fight to be confident enough, or to be diligent enough, focused enough, routine enough? Maybe I've got to have the right kind of relationship with myself. Whatever it is that's going to help me show up in this way that I need to show up, and really ultimately get the kind of outcome that I want to get. That's, I think, the battle. That's where the spotlight should be. That should be where a lot of our energy is happening. But I think with this example and lots of other examples where people are stressed, we find ourselves kind of tossing and tussling with the stress itself. And I don't think that could actually really get you anywhere, because I don't know if that's a battle really that winnable, because it's like the more you fight with it, the more stressed you become, the more entangled in it you become. But even if somehow you saw yourself coming out on top of that battle with the stress, that's not the thing you actually care about. What you really care about is the thing causing the stress, whatever the situation is, whatever the outcome is actually from that situation that you might be really, really wanting.
Yeah, it's interesting because in listening to you, one of the things that comes to my mind is that you used the word battle quite a few times, and you said in some sense we want to move away from the battle with the stress to battling something else. And as you were talking about it, it almost became like I'm battling to become the version of myself I want to become. And much of that battle happens before this particular moment, right? It's that you mentioned getting enough sleep. Well, that's a habit that you develop over time. You talked about eating right. That's, again, I have to shop for the right kinds of food. I have to make the decision about having those things on hand. I have to be prepared in order on this particular day to have that food in my kitchen. Mm-hmm. And so the battle is really a battle of becoming the kind of person that I want to become. And that inherently prepares me for these particular moments. Which makes me think of a question, which is in trying to become that version of myself, or kind of claiming this identity for myself, what helps? This is going to be a convoluted question, but I'll do my best to ask it. What helps to be able to engage in that meaningfully rather than letting that become something stressful? I'm trying to become this version of myself, and that could turn into its own sense of worry or concern, or maybe I'm not moving fast enough to become this version of myself. How do I meaningfully become that thing, that person, without letting that become something stressful?
Well, I think the fuel behind stress, what makes stress show up, is the kind of battle that you're having. If you're fighting with stress, fighting with that stressful situation, I think the odds are 95% of the time you're fighting off an undesirable outcome. You're fighting off I don't want that bad thing to happen, and the probability or my expectation of that bad thing is causing me to be stressed. It's causing so much tension inside of me. Work is stressful because I got to keep doing this and this and this. If I lose these responsibilities, or if I fail at these responsibilities, or if I don't do as well as I'd like to do, I'm thinking about all the things that could happen. I just viscerally feel all of those things and expect all of those negative things. And so now I'm fighting with the stress that I have. I'm trying to keep it down and contain it and deal with it, and all just to fend off, I don't want those negative outcomes. But when we turn our attention, like we said, put this spotlight over on, here's who I want to be, and very much attached to that is, here's the outcome that I want to have. And now I'm fighting for that outcome, which is a really, really different thing. To fight away laziness, but to fight for physical fitness are very, very different things. One thing you march towards, the other you kind of cower away from and run away from, and out of desperation feel like you're just constantly pushing and pushing, trying to get away from it. And so I think it's a different kind of experience, the like transaction with yourself that happens when you make movement on these different battles. When I make movement on the I'm fighting with stress and fighting to get away from a negative outcome battle, the movement that happens there is it perpetuates itself. It's I feel bad, I feel burnt out, I feel like I'm running in circles trying to evade this thing constantly because you're never fully in the clear. But when you make movement on this kind of a battle over here, the kind of battle that's I'm moving towards the outcome that I want, I'm moving in a way that syncs me up with being the version of myself that I want to be. It's like every step feels like, oh, I could just gained a little bit more. I just moved a little bit more towards that. I can be a little bit prouder. I can feel a little bit better about myself. I can feel a little bit more capable. And so then you get this other kind of perpetual feedback that kind of motions you towards where you're trying to go rather than making you feel stuck in the thing you're trying to get away from.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And one of the things that came to my mind, this is going to be, again, kind of a weird connection, but I think oftentimes when I've learned from or read about like the social justice movement, one of the things that they kind of oftentimes come back to is the value of memory work, of remembering past situations, remembering difficulty, kind of remembering how you overcame those things, remembering that there's real power in movement, right? Just acknowledging one small step at a time. And I think sometimes when we're in these really stressful situations, we are just like stuck in this moment, and we're wrestling with like, and it's almost like we're dreading a future. We're saying like, I have to do something in this moment to change what the future will be. And a lot of what I hear you talking about is, in some sense, as I'm trying to become that person, a lot of it is that memory work of just remembering like, where have I come? What battles have I overcome? When have I been successful in the past? When has this version of me shown up? And then in this particular potentially stressful moment, it's remembering that. It's like, again, kind of pausing and saying, okay, what progress have I seen myself make? Where have I seen myself grow in this area? You use the example of physical fitness, or like I'm remembering that I'm fighting for physical fitness and I'm not fighting to overcome laziness. So looking in my past and saying, where's evidence of physical fitness? And saying, what helped me back then to be physically fit or to move in the direction of physical fitness? That memory work, it's almost like using the memory to say, this is just one step in an ongoing progression. I'm not trying to change the future. I'm just trying to continue to move in the same direction that I've been moving, rather than like, oh, I have this history that I regret or that I'm dreadful of, and now I have, this moment is so meaningful because I have to change it. And just the language that's associated with that, I can just see a lot of that pressure coming off of like, I just have to take the next step versus like, I have to change the complete trajectory of what's happening here. And so I think that you're really highlighting a real value in just, again, kind of sitting in that moment and saying, what does this moment mean? And using that memory work to say, I'm just continuing the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that perspective taking, that re-remembering thing can kind of help sync you up more with, the side that you're trying to lean towards, or the version of yourself that you're trying to be. And the other thing that I'll add, that I think can really help mediate a situation that's full of stress for you, or a thing that's causing a lot of stress for you, is being able to kind of like gauge the temperature a bit, to reset how you're looking at things, how you're looking at yourself, how you're looking at the situation that you're in. Very similar to kind of this memory thing that you're talking about. I feel like at any moment or any aspect of our life, any thing that we're doing or situation that we're dealing with, we could be convinced one way or another that we're doing well, or that we're maybe struggling with that thing, especially if it's an ongoing thing. I think people can experience that sometimes if they hear like negative feedback about it, or they're criticized about it, and they start to become self-doubtful. They lean towards this negative side. But if they get some positive feedback, maybe their boss tells them they're doing a great job, or their parent says, "Oh, I'm really proud of you. I can't believe you're doing these kinds of things." And then you can feel yourself pull over into the other side. You can feel like, "Oh, wow, then I've reassessed, what I'm making of this, and apparently now I can start to really see and agree with, I can do this, or I'm doing something valuable. I'm doing something really well." And so I think there's sometimes a need to do that within ourselves when we're dealing with a really stressful situation, is to be able to kind of pause and look for the signs that I'm going the right way, the signs that I'll probably be all right as I'm dealing with this. One of the first things you said was, this is probably not as big a deal as we might be feeling like it is in the moment. Like, we're so zoomed in, but if we saw the bigger picture, this is one test out of a bunch of tests, out of a bunch of classes, out of a bunch of years, out of, your whole life. And I think most stressful situations are usually like that, where this is just one moment. And if we let ourselves kind of zoom out a bit, we can start to relieve some of that pressure that we can feel. But I think also we can start to see more of the picture and more of the things that might tell us, actually, we're going to be okay. Actually, things probably are pretty fine. Or maybe even I could find evidence for how things are working. Things are going pretty well. Things are well above where they should be if I were to expect the negative outcomes of the things that I might want to run away from.
Yeah, the other thing that it makes me think of, oftentimes when people talk about like stress management and all of those kinds of things, a term or an idea that really is closely connected to that is the idea of self-care.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of things about self-care can be really beneficial. So I don't want to say like you shouldn't engage in self-care. But I think oftentimes the way we think about self-care can be really trivial. And I think we can add some like oomph to what self-care is and why we do it. And what I mean by that is, like, oftentimes you hear people are like, well, just take deep breaths, or take a long bath, or go on a walk, and it's like all these things that are like, instead of dealing with the task at hand, it's almost like step out of the task, take care of yourself, rejuvenate yourself, and then get back in there. And in really stressful situations, I might not have the luxury of doing that, I might not have the time for doing that. And so it makes me kind of think about like, well, where do these intersect? Why is self-care such an important component here? And I think that this concept that we keep kind of gravitating back to of like identity, or like the version of yourself that you want to be, that can guide what self-care is. If I want to be the kind of person who engages in relationships with love and with compassion and with a sense of understanding somebody else, then in that moment where it gets tense, then self-care might be like, okay, I need to re-ground myself. I need to pause for a second. I need to think, okay, what can I love about myself? What's something about this person that I can really love and appreciate? How do I convey that love to them? Or maybe the self-care is like, take a step back, and while I'm doing that deep breathing, the deep breathing might be helpful, but really what's going to be helpful is changing my perspective of saying like, how can I be compassionate to this person? So the deep breathing might get me to slow down, might give me a moment to think, but the deep breathing won't change the situation. I have to make a determination to say, who am I going to be when I show up in this situation? I want to be a person who shows up with compassion. So while I'm taking that moment to deep breathe or to think or to whatever, I'm also thinking, how can I show up with compassion? What is it about their situation that I can be compassionate about? And so I think when we kind of lay on top of identity this idea of self-care, all of a sudden these tasks that could seem somewhat trivial could really contribute to who I'm trying to be, right? If going for a walk is the self-care that I choose, maybe I choose that if I'm also trying to move in a direction of physical fitness, right? Whereas if I'm just trying to be productive and accomplish things on the list, maybe going for a walk is going to detract from what's on this list. And so I think self-care is really valuable, but I think self-care needs to serve the purpose of, who do I want to be? What version of myself do I want to show up as?
Yeah, I like that. I like this conceptualizing self-care almost as the opposite of stress, because in a lot of ways it is. I think stress, ironically, can kind of push you to do things or think things and feel things too that are counterproductive to what you want. They're going to end up making you less happy, less productive, less capable of whatever the thing is that you want in that situation. Whereas self-care, I think, goes in the opposite direction. It makes you more capable of whatever it is that you want. It makes you happier. It makes you have more well-being, more satisfaction, more sense of like things are balanced, things are well, I'm feeling all right. And I usually think of self-care. I think you're right that it's a very easy temptation, apparently, that we can kind of slip into these trivial understandings of self-care. And that means, I go to the spa or something, or eat a dessert. And I don't know, like something that just feels like that's nice and that's enjoyable. So it must be self-care. But I think what I usually make of self-care is that if you think of either someone you deeply care about, someone you just have an abundance of love and care for, or you could even imagine from someone else's perspective, someone who cares a lot for you, someone who just deeply loves you and deeply cares about you, what would you do for that person you care about? What suggestions would you make to that person? What would you say to them to try to get them to be their best self, to try to be well, to be healthy, to deal with whatever difficult situations that they're in? And if you're going to take the perspective of someone else who cares about you, what would that person say for you? They might say, you should sleep well, you should eat well. Oh, it's time you take a break. Maybe you should go on that walk. You seem really tense. Maybe you should slow down a bit and take a few deep breaths, clear your mind. And if we're going to put it in sync with this idea also of being the right version of yourself, trying to be a certain version of yourself, I think that really loving, caring voice could also be an expert in that version of that thing that you want to be. If this was someone who was mentoring you or coaching you in that direction, they would say, here's the things you should do that are good for you. But also, if this is the outcome that you want, if this is the kind of person that you want, you really should do this kind of a thing. And I think that captures what self-care is. That's I care so deeply about you and I love you so much. And if we're looking at a specific direction that we want to go in, here's what you need to do and be and think and feel to find yourself moving in that direction, especially in a way that is going to satisfy you and not make you feel like you're losing some part of yourself or that you're being worn down by this process itself.
Yeah, I really appreciate that that relational component because I think at our very core we're relational beings, right? And so I can't just satisfy myself or become the version I want to be without considering like what ramifications does that have on the people around me. And I think the other thing that does is that it broadens it. You put it really into the conception of love, like who really loves you or cares deeply about you, and vice versa. And I think when we remember that, it also gives permission to say, I don't have to necessarily do all of these things by myself.
Yeah.
I can seek out counsel or advice from somebody. I can ask somebody to help me and say, like, I have too many things here on my list. Do you mind taking over one of these for me, or more than one of these for me? And I think sometimes we think that offloading means I'm becoming less of the version of myself that I want to be. And I think the reality is we have to remember at our very core, we are relational people, that we're meant to support each other, to care about each other. And when I let somebody help me or assist me, the relationship that I have with them strengthens. I feel a stronger affinity toward them. And again, if you pull back, you say, do I want to be the kind of person who can complete everything on my list? Or do I want to be the person who has deep, meaningful relationships where I can rely on somebody, where I can feel support from somebody, where our nature is to be in a relationship where we can feel supported and comforted and taken care of and those kinds of things. And so just taking that step back, all of a sudden completing the things on the list becomes less important than developing this relationship of allowing somebody to step in and help us become who we want to be.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Things become more possible when there is a relational network around it, relational meaning even around it. And certainly if you can kind of get some direct support too with the things that you're trying to accomplish. I think just the sensation of I'm not doing it alone, or it's not solely in my hands, it's solely dependent on me making everything go perfectly. That relieves some of that tension, that pressure that we started this whole conversation with.
Yeah, good point. Is there anything else that you feel like we should make sure to get to?
Nope, we solved another big problem. We did it.
Like always, we've done everything. But hopefully that conversation was helpful for you. I think it really helped me to kind of expand my perspective of stress, of the tension that exists, and to say there are some really valuable things that we can do to kind of loosen some of that tension, to alleviate some of that stress. And it really, I think, does lie in working long term to become the kind of person I want to be, putting myself in relationships where I really feel like are valuable. And so hopefully that conversation was useful for you. We would love to hear what your thoughts are about that. If you have other ideas or thoughts about how we can overcome stress, we would love to hear it. If you feel like this conversation was helpful and that you think somebody in your life might benefit from it, we would appreciate it if you would share it with them. Send the link to this to them. But in the meantime, go become who you want to become. Become the best version of yourself.